So, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be back here in Georgia and seeing so many friends and former colleagues. And although I'm now based in Washington, I do continue to follow with great interest and care and affection, as always, what has been going on in Georgia. And it always used to be said, as a diplomat in Georgia, that it was always quite a relief at the end of one's posting to go back home away from the hothouse that is Georgian politics. On this occasion, I have to say it's quite nice to be away from the hothouse that is Washington politics and to come here to Georgia. So I'm really delighted to be back here. I'm going to suggest our panelists sit down because we have quite a long session ahead of us. I want to thank the conference organisers for organising such a terrific conference with a great range of topics, and for allowing us to start with this one, which I think follows on very nicely from the conversations with the President and the Prime Minister, delving down a little bit more deeply into what is going on in Georgia now and how is it headed into the future. We do have, throughout the rest of the conference, extensive sessions looking at what is happening within the EU, what is happening in NATO, what is happening in terms of US foreign policy, transatlantic relations, what's going on with Russia and in the region. So I'm proposing to use this session not to dwell on Georgia's Euro-Atlantic integration or some of the foreign policy challenges, because I know they will come out in the later sessions. Instead, I would like to pick up on the opening sessions to delve down on what is happening within Georgia domestically, and in particular in terms of its domestic development, democratic development, not least because we have a stellar lineup of speakers here: the current chairman of the Georgian parliament, Irakli Kobakhidze, and two former chairmen of the Georgian parliament, David Usupashvili and David Bakradze, all of whom continue to play a very leading role in Georgia's political life. So I particularly want to pick up on what I think has been one of the major strategic discussions over the last year in terms of Georgia's democratic evolution, which is the proposal to reform the constitution. I would like to conduct this conversation without getting into the weeds of legal arguments on individual articles or justifications for them, but more looking at how the process of revising the constitution has been conducted, how the substance of that might contribute to Georgia's democratic development, and with a nod to our fourth panelist, Ambassador Ian Kelly of the United States, how the international community is observing these processes and their observations on the constitutional reform. So I would like to start with a couple of rounds of questions up here, and then we will open it up and we can take it, obviously, onto other issues beyond the constitution. But I would like to keep it at that level of policy. And I would like to start by, in preparing for today's session, I did a little bit of research and found this excellent piece by an Indian political theorist on what are the essentials of a good constitution. And it's a very good quote. It says, "A constitution, like a tree, is only suitable to the climate of a particular country, and therefore it is difficult to have a general standard for the evaluation of a good constitution." By which I think he means just because a particular provision may exist in somebody else's constitution, it doesn't necessarily mean it's right for another constitution. The Indian expert goes on to say, however, a few points may be taken as requisite. One, a good constitution should suit the social and political atmosphere of the country, be drafted with political realities in mind, and should not be an imposed document. Two, it should be confined to fundamentals. It should state clearly the powers and functions of different organs and their mutual relations, and not give rise to ambiguity. Three, the process of amendment should not be too easy or too difficult. 4, it should provide for the fundamental rights of citizens and put a limit on the authority of the state. And 5, it should allow for an independent judiciary, essential to preserve and protect the provisions of the Constitution. So I would like to turn now to each of the panelists in turn to ask for their assessment about how both the process and the substance of the current constitutional reform process matches up against those criteria. But I'm going to turn first of all to Irakli Kobakhidze on my right, because with the Georgian Dream having recently declared that it has not been able to find a consensus with other parties, it has in a recent statement said it is willing and prepared to adopt this constitution without the input of any of the opposition. So I think there is a particular onus and burden and responsibility on you as the head of the process to give confidence that it does meet those criteria and that this is a constitution that will stand the test of time. And in particular, given that you are now proposing to adopt this constitution unilaterally, how does that avoid the first criteria of risking being seen as an imposed document? Because it's not just the opposition that have said they have concerns with it, there's also many members of civil society. And I'd like to quote a recent NDI survey that cited that amongst the correspondents, 60% of them were not even aware that this process was going ahead. So that's the process. And then on the substance, and if you will forgive me, but for the benefit of some of our international attendees who may not have been following this so closely, the Prime Minister is quite right to say that the Venice Commission has in general welcomed the thrust of the revisions, but they have expressed concern in one or two areas, and if you will forgive me, I will quote in particular on the electoral reform. They were particularly concerned that if you were moving to a proportional system, which they very much welcomed, that the benefits of that risked being counteracted or undermined by the proposal to have a 5% threshold in order to gain access to Parliament, no longer to be able to form electoral blocks. And by the way, I observed Georgian Dream itself was an electoral bloc when it was first elected. And thirdly, this process of redistributing unallocated votes entirely to the winning party, which the Prime Minister says has now been moderated. There were a few other issues in the Venice Commission's assessment, but those were some of the heart of the concerns. And they particularly said it's in the context of the state of development of the political party system in Georgia. But the Venice Commission noted that the Georgian Dream and you yourself personally had given them a commitment that if they continued to have concerns and any aspects of the draft were negatively assessed by the Commission, you would not adopt those provisions. So my second question is will you honour that commitment if they continue to have those concerns? Yeah. Thank you.
First of all, thank you very much for this excellent introduction. It's a great pleasure and honor for me to participate in this great conference together.
Can you hear? Can everybody hear?
No. Maybe it's
Is this working? Do you want to try that?
First of all, I would like to thank you for the excellent introduction, and I would like to thank the organizers of this conference for the excellent conference, and I'm really honored and pleased to be participant of this panel together with two excellencies, the British and US ambassadors, and together with two speakers of the Georgian Parliament. It's an honor to speak about the present and future constitutions together with you. When we talk about the constitution and constitutional amendments, of course, two things matter. One is the process, and the second one is the content of the document of the constitutional amendments. As for the process, we did our best to structure the process in the best way, and for this purpose we created a special commission, the State Constitutional Commission, with a very broad involvement of different stakeholders. including the parliamentary and non-parliamentary parties. There was a very broad participation of political actors. This commission also involved the activities of the non-governmental organizations, experts, and all the constitutional bodies which are envisaged by the present Georgian constitution. So it was a very participatory process ensured under the State Constitutional Commission, and we managed to work very effectively during the 4 months period. It was a daily work with the broad involvement of the stakeholders. There was a very high rate of participation at each meeting. The NGOs, experts, constitutional bodies, political parties were actively participating in the activities of the State Constitutional Commissions, and I can tell you that I would say more than 80% of the amendments which are envisaged by the new constitutional draft came from the proposals from experts, non-governmental organizations, and opposition parties. That was the outcome of the activities of the State Constitutional Commission. So finally we came up with a document which is envisaging dramatic changes. We are moving to a clear parliamentary system. Now the present system is already the parliamentary one. We have the parliamentary system of government with a very limited functions of the president. This system has been introduced through the 2010 changes to the constitution. Now we already have the parliamentary system of government, and we are keeping the parliamentary system. We are just fine-tuning it, which is one of the main benefits of the constitutional amendments to be adopted by the Parliament of Georgia. And we are moving to the proportional system. As you have mentioned, it was not possible. It was the political issue. It was not possible to move to the proportional system for the next parliamentary election. So, and I can explain the reasons behind. We had different reasons. We had the very complex situation inside the parliamentary majority and also outside the parliamentary majority with other political parties. We are moving to the proportional system. That's for the first time that we are making a very concrete step to that direction, which will benefit the democratic system in Georgia. As for me personally, I would welcome, of course, moving to the proportional system already for the next parliamentary elections, but it was not possible due to lack of readiness of the opposition parties to support the constitution, even under the proportional system 2020. So that was the one issue. And secondly, we had challenges, of course, inside the parliamentary majority, because when you have 116 members in the parliamentary majority, out of which 73 are the majoritarians, and when you tell these people that you have to immediately abolish their districts, of course it's not easy to achieve consensus with only 116 members of the parliamentary majority. With the support of the parliamentary minority, with the support of the parliamentary opposition, it would be possible to move to the proportional system already for 2020 elections, but without their support it was just impossible. And when I had personally, and when we had consultations with the representatives of the parliamentary opposition, immediately after the plenary session of the Venice Commission, we proposed them to vote for the constitutional amendments, including the proportional system in 2020. But they refused, and they came up with 3 other ultimatums related to the draft, which was really not understandable for us because these were not kind of politically significant issues. In this situation, we had to talk with the members, 116 members of the parliamentary majority, and finally we had 2 alternative solutions. One was not to pass any draft, and the second solution was to pass it, but with the proportional system in 2024. Again, none of the governments managed to make this kind of decision, a very concrete decision about moving to the proportional system, and now it will happen in a very concrete way. We are putting into the base part of the constitution the proportional system, and this system will be enacted immediately after the next parliamentary elections, which means in November 2020, which is a very significant step forwards, I would say. I would welcome again moving to the proportional system already for 2020, but politically it was impossible. If we talk today about the process again, we made another attempt to convince the opposition that they had to support the constitutional amendments, and we came up with a very concrete proposal. We asked them to provide a list of issues under reflection of which they would support the constitutional amendments. but they refused. They did not provide this kind of list to the parliamentary majority, which in this situation it was just impossible to continue any consultations about the constitutional amendments. So that was a situation related to the process. It was just impossible to pass the constitutional amendments with proportional system in 2020 due to lack of readiness of the opposition to support the constitutional amendments in any case. So that was the final outcome of these consultations. Let me just talk about the content of the document. The content is the most important thing, because any constitutional work will work with the proper content. As for the content of the document, we had an opportunity to send this document to the Venice Commission, and we have already received the final opinion about the draft from the Venice Commission. The Venice Commission assessed the document in a very positive manner. We have a very positive assessment about the draft. The Venice Commission had 23 recommendations, and we took into consideration 20 recommendations of the Venice Commission. There are just 3 issues which are not of a political importance for the democratic system, which means that we took into consideration all crucial recommendations of the Venice Commission. So that was the outcome of the process. Finally, the document is fine with the Venice Commission. The legal assessment of the document is very positive. That is something that we can confirm with the document sent to us by the Venice Commission. And now we are expecting the final opinion again from the Venice Commission about the adopted draft of the constitutional amendments. Again, the document is establishing a very fine system, a very fine parliamentary system, with a proportional electoral system envisaged and to be enacted after the parliamentary elections of 2020. The main goal of any constitution is to avoid autocracy. We had different types of constitutions during the past years, since early 90s. We had 3 different wordings of the constitutions, and under these 3 different wordings, the different governments managed to establish the autocratic regimes. That was the outcome of the previous constitutions, which were adopted with a broad consensus. That is something which should be highlighted. We had a very broad consensus. In 1995, we adopted the non-democratic constitution with broad consensus in 1995. We adopted a non-democratic constitution with broad consensus in 2004, and we adopted a non-democratic constitution with broad consensus in 2010. Now it happens for the first time that we are adopting a very democratic constitution with a little consensus. UK, I can ask you what is better, to have a high quality document with a less consensus, or to have a very low quality document with broader consensus. So finally we had 2 alternatives, and we decided for the second alternative. We decided to have a very high quality document, which will again avoid any kind of autocracies in Georgia in a long-term perspective, and that is the main outcome of this reform process. You asked about the particular issues related to the electoral system. You had a question about the 5% threshold, about abolition blocks. I can tell you that this system, the new electoral system, which will be enacted after the next parliamentary elections, is fully in line with the best European standards. 5% threshold for political parties is established in the absolute majority of the EU countries. 5% threshold again for political parties. We are introducing this system after the parliamentary elections of 2020, and as for the so-called bonus system, which is also envisaged by the constitutional amendments, the Venice Commission came up with a concrete proposal to put the ceilings to the bonus system, and we followed this proposal, and we have a very strict ceilings set established for the bonus system. Finally, the proportional system, which will be established in a full-fledged manner after the next parliamentary elections, will provide the European type electoral environment in Georgia, and that's one of the crucial outcomes of the constitutional reform process. Again, so the one more important thing is that it's a document of compromise. When we look at the document, I can provide a list of at least 20 only crucial issues which strengthens the opposition and which strengthens the democracy in Georgia, starting from the creation of the investigation commissions by the opposition, and ended by the proportional system and other crucial issues. But if we ask any expert, what is the issue which benefits the ruling party? There is no single issue which benefits the ruling party. You can compare two different documents. One is the present constitution, and another one is the new draft. If you compare the two documents, there is no single sentence in a document which benefits the ruling party. This is the outcome which clearly shows what was the political will of the ruling party and what is the quality of the new document. Thank you very much again.
Thank you very much. I would just like to clarify a couple of points. You say that you have taken on board 20 out of 23 recommendations. Is that from the Venice Commission's June report? And is this now a publicly available document, the revised draft?
The revised draft is, of course, publicly available. You can find the document on the official website of the Parliament, and we have already sent the English version of the document to the Venice Commission and other partners.
Okay, thank you. And in your 1st of September statement, you said that, and you just repeated it there, that you were very frustrated that you invited opposition parties to list the issues they still wanted to see changed in the Constitution, but they apparently did not come forward with that. We now have a process that the President has mentioned he has begun to try and initiate a new round of consultations with the opposition parties with a view to trying to identify those issues. So, if they do come up with that list of issues, will you reopen negotiations with them?
We have already had several attempts. Again, there was a just very simple question asked to the opposition parties. We asked them to propose a list of issues under reflection of which they would support it. For example, proportional elections, direct election of the president, and we support it. We have never received this kind of response from the opposition. And now we think that it was a kind of predetermined will of the opposition not to ensure achievement of the consensus around the draft. It was a very simple question, and we had several attempts to receive the response on the question, but we have never received such response. Again, if the opposition has the will not to ensure achievement of the consensus, in this situation, this goal will be achieved. It's quite easy. Again, we have made a very clear statement about the Venice Commission's role in the constitutional reform process. And we said that we will not adopt any single norm in the constitutional amendments which will be legally negatively assessed by the Venice Commission. It was quite clear from the very beginning that the government had a very positive political will to deliver a high-quality document which would be in full compliance with legal standards. In this situation, the opposition had the only chance to criticize the process. They had to accentuate on the need of consensus, and finally they had to refuse to be part of this consensus. It was quite a simple political, task for the opposition, and they have achieved it. But the main thing is, again, the quality of the product, the quality of the document which has been delivered by the State Constitutional Commission and by the Parliament of Georgia, and this quality is extremely high. We are establishing the European type parliamentary government system with the proportional system of parliamentary elections, which will again avoid any kind of autocracies in a very long-term perspective for Georgia. Thank you.
But if I may just press you a little bit with a simple request for a yes or a no, if the opposition do come up with a list of issues, will you extend the time and the process to allow another effort to achieve consensus?
I don't know. We can try it again. We are just not optimistic. We are not optimistic because we have attempted it several times and we have never achieved this result. We have never got the response from the opposition parties. We can try it again, but I am not optimistic at all because of the past experience that we have.
But I take that as a yes, if I may. In which case, perhaps, and I'm conscious of the time and I want to allow all our panelists to speak and to invite questions from the audience, but that gives me the perfect moment to turn to you, David, as the head of the parliamentary opposition in Parliament, to ask, are you able to produce a clear list of amendments that you would like to see reflected in the document? And it is a compromise. I mean, it is a process that requires give and take. So it is not necessarily the case that everything you propose has to be accepted, but are you willing to provide a set of issues? And in the interest of transparency, can you say to us now, what are your problems with the current draft? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And it's first of all, it's a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to see increasing number of important guests coming here every year, so it's a good sign. And I'm really pleased to be here and to address such a distinguished audience. Well, on constitutional issue. So, being a former speaker myself, I do know practically that how hard it is to strike a consensus among opposition. And it's virtually impossible to have a consensus where everybody is on board and everybody agrees. But it's first time in my memory when we have a situation when nobody agrees. And it's a very significant moment to be compared with the past experience. Now we have a moment of total anti-consensus against these constitutional amendments. All opposition parties, there is not a single opposition party, single political party outside majority who is in favor of these constitutional amendments. There is no single, more or less known, no NGO or civil society representative who is in favor of these amendments. Institutions like Presidential Institute and President himself, Public Defender, all the constitutional institutions are against. So again, understanding and knowing how difficult it is to have the total consensus, and in politics it may be impossible, but at least you always manage together a pool of your supporters. And it's first time in my memory when there is no pool. There is just one political party adopting a constitution with votes of one political party, everybody else being against, and there are representatives of other political parties as well in this hall, and I guess they will agree to what I say. So, Speaker mentioned that 80% of comments from opposition and NGOs had been accepted. And I have a question, if that was accepted, somebody should be happy. Because then somebody's comments and criticism has to be accepted. And I don't see, again, anybody happy in this process, because there is a totally unanimous anti-consensus against what is offered by Georgian Dream majority. Now, let me move to the point of responsibility of opposition. And of course, when majority has a constitutional majority in the parliament, constitutional majority, it's not just a privilege, it is also a responsibility. And it's responsibility of constitutional majority to take decisions. But having said that, of course, I do understand responsibility of opposition as well. So let me say how we see this process. I mean, first of all, the document, initial draft, which has been discussed, which was brought to public hearings, where we also participated as opposition. At the very last moment it was changed, and the key component of this document was changed, which was moving to proportionate list in 2020. And that was the key for absolute majority of opposition parties taking place in these considerations. Why it was changed? It was changed not as a result of consultations or talks between majority and opposition. It was changed as a result of the talks inside the majority. Again, I do understand that consensus inside the majority is important. Yes, it is. But we should not sacrifice consensus among other political parties for the sake of having unanimous support inside the majority. And that was the point when this whole story really was accelerated. And on opposition votes, I mean, we heard number of clear statements after that decision of majority to strike a consensus inside majority and not with opposition. Again, it's a very important moment. Now we have a consensus inside the majority, but no consensus between majority and the rest of political parties. So when this deal was struck, we heard a very clear statements from speaker, from other leaders of majority saying that even if now opposition offers something, we will not trade support of our party members for the support of opposition members, and the party unity and unity inside the majority is very important. I think that says everything. And that says how much room was left to opposition for any kind of agreement or any kind of compromise. Even more than that, I mean, after the document was adopted in 2 hearings in the parliament, majority offered as a dialogue. Just for you to know what's the legal process inside Georgia, I mean, every document goes through 3 hearings. But the 3rd hearing is only editorial. So you can insert comma or change word or like do something like that. Just editorial changes. Now Constitution is adopted with 2 hearings. And after that, we got an offer to start a dialogue. Our instant reaction was, yes, of course, we are ready for dialogue. But are you ready to move Constitution back to the 2nd hearing so that if we agree on something, there is a chance that this agreement is put into the text? And then again, the clear response was no. It is adopted with 2 hearings. Now let's sit down and talk, and we will adopt it with the 3rd hearing. Again, 3rd hearing is just editorial, and there will be no political talks about the issue, whether there are apostrophes or commas or dots missing in the text. There cannot be political dialogue on that. So the very fact that the document is adopted in 2 readings and the ruling party refuses, to reconsider and move it back to the 1st hearing shows that there is no room and no desire on the side of the ruling party to reach a consensus. On the quality of document, just to end up the demands of opposition, what opposition wants. What's these terrible guys want, being so ambiguous and unclear that nobody understands what we want. Let me be very simple with you now, telling what we want. 2 points. There may be other points as well, but 2 key points. 1, let's move to proportionate elections in 2020, and let's leave directly elected president. And if these 2 points are met, and we have said it, hundreds of times, and I'm reiterating it here, and I can even offer a deal to my friend speaker or to members of majority here. If they agree on these 2 points, I'm ready to put aside all the other differences and vote for the Constitution. Let's move to proportionate lists in 2020, and let's keep presidential institute as it is. Very simple. Is it hard to understand, dear friends? I think not. And again, I'm ready to put aside all the other differences and publicly commit myself that I will vote for the Constitution if that happens. So again, very clear position. And what is again important to underline that this is a position of all political opposition parties in this country. And I hardly remember any other case when entire opposition was unified against 1 or 2 single demands. We always had a problem of finding consensus. This time, opposition managed to come to a consensus on these 2 major points. Quality of document, I'm not a constitutionalist, I'm not even a lawyer, so probably Irakli knows legal issues better than I do, but I'm a politician, and I can tell you that document which contains number of one-time exceptions on major issues is not a good quality document to me. For example, we have a 5% threshold, but as a one-time exception, we will have 3% threshold in 2018. We have president elected by 4 years, but as a one-time exception, we will have president elected with 6 years next year. We are moving to proportionate list, but as a one-time exception, we'll keep majoritarian system as it is today. We are moving to indirect elections of president, but we will keep as a one-time exception directly elected president for next. Again, I'm not a lawyer, but I'm a politician, and when we have this number of one-time exceptions in this important document, to me that's not an indicator of quality at all. And since we mentioned election of president, and I'll try to be brief and end with that up, Alex. Election of president. Why do we believe that direct election of president is important for this country? As you started by your quotation from the beginning, constitution should be crafted based on specific needs of the country. And what is specific problem of Georgia? Starting from 1990, when we had first multi-party free elections in this country. We all the time had political party with overwhelmingly strong majority in the parliament. We had first President Gamsahurdia with constitutional majority in the parliament. Then we had Shevardnadze, again constitutional majority and overwhelming majority. Then we had Saakashvili and UNM, again constitutional majority. Now we have Georgian Dream, again constitutional majority. So in this country, we have a problem of over-concentration of power. And in this situation, we should strengthen the system of checks and balances. Because how we should stand up against this over-concentration of power is by having more independent, more stronger institutions which set the system of checks and balances. And by abolishing directly elected president and subordinating president on the will of the same political party which dominates in the parliament, basically we weaken the system of checks and balances, make president dependent on the will of the very same political party, and by that assist to the over-concentration of power in the country. To me, that's a very simple reason why I believe that president should be directly elected in this country, notwithstanding names, personalities, political plans. I can even tell you, I even don't know who will be presidential candidate next elections from our party, whom will we support. I don't care about it. It's too early. It's not about names. It's not about plans. It's about the vision, and I believe that here we need stronger, independent, directly elected institutions, because that's the recipe to better Georgian democracy. And what we're doing now, we're making a step in opposite direction. So, let me end up with that, not to be too long, and I think I have covered more or less all important issues from the viewpoint of opposition.
Okay, thank you very much. So, if you are willing to state that the two key changes you would like to see, which are not small changes, they're very fundamental, is to move back to the original proposal for proportional election to start from 2020, and secondly, not to do away with an elected president. So, Irakli, I'm going to give you a chance to come back to this, but I want to give others to comment. But you do have two very clear proposals, and you are a legal constitutional expert. The concern that David has raised, that you have tried to pass this by having for one time only, for one time only, for one time only, is a bridging mechanism but does that meet the criteria of standing the test of time when future generations look at this constitution? And does it run the risk, as the President said, of looking like it was crafted with the interests of the current ruling party very much in mind to see you through the next election? I'll give you a chance to come back, but if the opposition comes to you very clearly with those proposals, then you do have a basis to reopen negotiations. So my question is, are you willing to do that? But before turning back to you, I would like to ask David Usupashvili to give us a little bit of historical perspective. Rereading your profile, you've been involved in constitutional amendment processes almost as long as Georgia has existed as an independent country, so you have tremendous experience. One of the things that I think is often observed from outside is that parties' positions on these issues seem to shift depending on whether they're in government or not. And there is a risk of pot calling kettle black in terms of some of the discussions. Parties being in favor of the Iraq war before they were against the Iraq war. How do you see these processes? And how do you see this stalemate being broken?
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you to the organizers of this conference, and especially for finding time for this kind of important but a little bit boring discussion. Constitution is not, and constitutional issues which are always so clear. But I want to thank to Mr. Speaker and Mr. Former Speaker who made my job easier, because they kind of exposed the things and demonstrated what are the problems and issues. I'll try to give this little bit historic perspective to the process, but in 1 minute. Yes, that's right, that it happened that being a young lawyer, I was part of the people team who in December 1990 touched the constitution first. Social Georgia's constitution, because after the first multi-party elections in October 1990, non-communist government came to the power, and of course the first issue was what to do. And the decision was, let's amend the constitution of socialist Georgia for immediate changes in order to move forward, and then come back to the new constitution later on. But unfortunately that later on did not happen, because after 1 year we managed to have here this civil war, and the elected government and president were ousted from the country. And the new people who took the power, the military council, in February 1992, announced that, okay, Socialist Georgia's constitution with Zviad Gamsakhurdia's amendments are dismissed, and the constitution adopted by the government, by the parliament of the Democratic Georgia in 1921 is activated. Well, this was a very political decision because that constitution clearly could not serve as legal ground for state functioning. Therefore, the interim parliament, not parliament, but the council, who came together after Eduard Shevardnadze came back in March 1992 from Moscow, in 2 months period, we drafted the law about state power of Georgia. And that law was serving as constitutional foundation for Georgian state until 1995. For 3 years. We had parliament elected and state bodies were functioning based on that law. Because in those very difficult days, the political leaders came to very right conclusion that we had not to be hurried to adopt new constitution. Because country was emerging from the civil war. Country was divided. Therefore, in 92, we specially drafted electoral system for parliamentary elections in order to get to the parliament as many parties as possible. So the parliament, which was elected in 92 and ended with the adoption of the constitution in 95, had 26 political parties represented in the parliament. And all these 26 parties had representation in the State Constitutional Commission, which functioned for more than 2 years, and drafted the very first constitution of Georgia. In that drafting process, international community were involved, not as many as now we have those friends, but some people like President Barack Obama, who then was law professor Barack Obama of Chicago Law School, had to do something with Georgian constitution as well, because professors from Chicago Law School were consulting this process. So, the constitution of 1995 was born in that very difficult period, but with the widest possible participation of political forces, constitutional experts, then emerging NGO segment, and so on. So, since 95, we had this constitution which was, as we called politicians or NGO people, abused several times by different governments. For example, late Prime Minister Joania struck a deal with some political parties in 1990, and somehow he managed to convince them, these small parties, that it would be better for them if the electoral threshold would be increased from 5% to 7%. Joania was really a skillful politician, because he somehow convinced small parties that it would be better for them. So they voted for that amendment, and the threshold was increased to 7%. What happened after that, those elections? Only Joania and his team entered to the parliament, and nobody else. So since then, there were many tactical changes in the constitution. Major disaster for the constitution happened in February 2004, when the newly elected president, after the Rose Revolution time, started to kind of strengthen his power system. And in those days, and there are some people I see in this room who witnessed that process, he was very honest. President Saakashvili, I mean. He said, I don't want noisy parliament. I don't want parliament who will stop my fast reforms. Well, also, he said, we need to introduce the position of the prime minister, because Zurab Joania had big contribution to that revolution, and he had to be kind of equally recognized and so on. I'll not go in those details, but in 2004, in February, those constitutions were adopted in a similar hurry, in 3 days, with 3 votings. And in those days, international community were very supportive to those changes. And the kind of advice to the people who were protesting about this process was that, well, these new energetic young leaders need some freedom. They need to kind of reshape the country and power system as they want, because they are right people. Unfortunately, that was the start of the process, which then ended with bigger problems later on. The second time when the constitution was abused in another way, that was 2010, when Mr. Saakashvili was preparing himself for another job, for prime ministerial job, following the steps of our dear friends from the north, Mr. Putin, you know, went through this step. That's why he shifted the power to the prime ministerial office, not because he was the fan of the parliamentary system. That's why after the changes of 2010 in the constitution, we received the problems Mr. Speaker was talking about. Because yes, the prime minister became the head of the executive branch, but that was about it. There were issues which needed to be clarified about the presidential functions. There were issues to be clarified between parliament and the government. That's how in 2012, when the new parliament came to the power, and the new parliament took the office, that was the only parliament in Georgian history which did not have majority with constitutional majority. And on that, Mr. Prime Minister made a little mistake was by saying that in the previous parliament there was a constitutional majority in the hands of the majority, but we failed to pass the constitutional amendments. No. That was first parliament, and I hope the next will be the same, where no single party had or electoral subject the constitutional majority. Now, what's going on now? And why so many people are upset? And let's look, why everybody are upset? Why the Venice Commission is upset? On one hand, they say that, yes, the text of the Constitution is high quality. On the other hand, they are upset because they were presented the text in which it was written that proportional system was going to be introduced by 2020. And they worked hardly about improving that proportional system. That's why they saluted the achievement of the government or majority. But when after 1 week that was changed, of course, Venice Commission is now upset. Because Constitution is not about promises. Constitution is about when it happens as well. Why the opposition is upset? Well, because Mr. Speaker took huge risk when at the beginning of the process he announced that the majority were ready for proportional system for 2020. And the opposition kind of received that word, that promise, but later on it appeared that that's not the case. The majority is not able to move for the system now. Yes, Irakli, because the version which was presented to the Venice Commission, nothing to say about the other things, yes, it was saying that proportional system for 2020 with big bonus for the leading party. But as soon as Venice Commission reduced that bonus to a certain degree, within the majority we saw disagreement that that was no more. But that's a separate issue. So, opposition is upset about that. Mr. Speaker and his team, they are upset as well, because rest of us, we just are not able to recognize huge work they have done. And I just admire his personal contribution to the text of the Constitution. And they are upset. NGOs are upset because they see what's going on in this country with this current system. During last 2016 elections, with this current system, which is going to be kept for 2020 elections, if nothing is changed in the draft, in 2016, in 73 majoritarian districts, produced the result after which 73 favorites of the ruling party won. While ruling party did not have even more than 50% support overall in the country. That's why I am addressing the people who represent the countries where majoritarian system is used. Have you ever had this kind of experience in France or in, I don't know, in other countries or in the United States? When one party takes all the majoritarian seats? No, never. Why? Because there are some other mechanisms involved in the system. That's why they are upset. International community is kind of upset because they see this kind of non-consensus based decision-making process. And there are many people who are upset as well, and those people have no clue in the constitutional issues, but they see everybody are upset and they are upset as well. So we get kind of situation when we don't see happy people around, including majority members who are now engaged in this problem.
How do we break the stalemate?
Now, the thing is that, I'm sorry you asked me to go to history, but that's why history is so dangerous thing, because you never get out from there. But one more historic thing. Just about 1 year ago, this gentleman, Mr. Kobakhidze, was ready to vote for proportional system for 2020. But the other gentleman, Mr. Bakradze, was not ready to vote for that system. Mr. Kobakhidze then was not a member of the parliament, but he was executive secretary of the ruling Georgian Dream Party. These gentlemen, the third one, myself, I was ready for vote for that, then and now. But my vote meant nothing then and here now, because these gentlemen controlled majority in the previous parliament, and the other gentleman controlled majority of the minority in that parliament. Unfortunately, we all missed that great chance. When Georgian Dream Coalition, after very painful internal debates and so on, and after huge efforts from Irakli Kobakhidze as well, Georgian Dream then declared that it was ready to vote and put this clause in the constitution, which would give to the country on this issue very clear future as soon as 2060 elections were over. Now, because of these political calculations, we have problems. And unfortunately, this electoral system issue is ruining the very fundamentals of the Constitution. Because here I have to disagree again with Irakli and with the Prime Minister as well. Because on the question why the whole Constitution is changed, the answer was that, well, it's not a big deal. I believe it's a very big deal. And I don't think that in the United States, since the end of the 18th century, there were no more bigger intellectuals than Thomas Jefferson and the others. But people never attempted to change the Constitution. Because when Constitution is there, and I gave some story about how the 95 Constitution was created, this is the foundation of the statehood. Therefore, in the Constitution, we need to protect some things until the very end. And we need to change the things what needs to be changed. Unfortunately, this higher technical quality of the text took over to other calculations. And now we are risking to come to the huge problem. This country experienced a lot of division, a lot of political fight. It was grounded on many different issues. But we never had political or societal division on the grounds of the Constitution as such. And now we are moving to this very dangerous direction. You heard some words from the President about this possible alternative or whatever constitutional process or something. I hope and I know he did not meant at this stage creating new draft of the Constitution, but I hear this from some people. Okay, Georgian Dream does not want to hear our opinion. Let's do something else without the Georgian Dream. And that's the very dangerous point. If political class emerges after this process with constitution which is supported by one party, and the rest of the people call that constitution as kind of paper of the Georgian Dream, that's where we will start very dangerous journey in the future. This country needs to strengthen the foundations of the Constitution. And I am proud to be former Speaker of the Parliament who did not harm the Constitution. Because sometimes we need to think more about this. Our actions, technically high quality actions, are improving constitutional foundations, or higher quality technical issues can deprive the trust and commitment to the Constitution. That's why I believe we all, since devoted so many time to this issue, need to kind of make steps to each other. Let's take out all these political calculations, who is going to be winner or loser. Because if the process goes like this, we are going to be losers, everybody. The country is going to be loser. Mr. Bakradze pointed out two issues. And if there is agreement from the government, there will be agreement from the opposition. I would propose further step to possible consensus without having any consultation with the opposition. He mentioned electoral system issue for the parliament, electoral system issue for the president. Let's agree on the electoral system of the parliament now. Let's move the final decision about the presidential electoral system for the decision of the next parliament, which we elected in 2020. Why? Government says that for 2018, presidential elections will be direct elections. And indirect elections will enter in force only after. So by that time, the new parliament will be there. In the constitution, they are putting very good instrument. When in certain cases, constitutional amendment needs approval of two different parliaments. So let's use that mechanism for this case as well. Have this issue voted by the parliament, if this parliament has this opinion, and leave the final decision for the parliament which will be elected for 2020. This will be probably another step towards bringing together the ideas. So what is left is the parliamentary electoral system. I take the issues, and as Bakradze mentioned, we all understand the difficulties of the political leadership in the current parliament, and specifically of the speaker. We went through this and we know this. And we all need to help to the people who are ready for the consensus. We all understand that such consensus never happens if there is no kind of insurance that the majority will stay together. And then, yeah, we understand this is kind of political priority for the leadership. And let's think about that as well. And if we sincerely help the people who are ready for this change now, and the speaker is ready and many others, individually, and if we help them and not to push them, I don't know, to the corners and so on, probably we can find solution for which we have a couple of weeks left. Thank you.
Thank you. I have let each of our three Georgian speakers speak at quite some length because I think this is an incredibly live discussion and there have been developments in the last 2 weeks. So I hope our audience has borne with me. I thought it was right to get these issues out on the table in a very clear statement of where the parties are. Ambassador, could I ask you to give an international perspective on these processes? And how important do you think it is that the final constitution, even if it takes more time, is adopted with a wider consensus?
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Alex. It's great to see you again. It's very much an honor to be here on this panel with three present and former speakers. I am not a former speaker. I am not even a constitutional scholar, but I have to say, like many Americans over the last 8 months.
proposes that you may be the next speaker.
Perhaps they should make you the speaker.
I am not running, and if asked, etc. But like a lot of Americans, I am becoming a lot more of an expert on the American Constitution over the last 8 months. And Kurt mentioned one of the real driving principles behind the Constitution as being guaranteeing the rights of political minorities. There's also devolution of power to the states. But I would say the most important driver of the U.S. Constitution was the whole idea of separation of powers, of three separate but equal branches of government. This is coming out of the colonial experience of of what was perceived to be an unaccountable monarch who was that there were not enough checks against that power. So the prime mechanism for having this kind of a system of checks and balances were three separate but equal branches of government. So, of course, the other two branches besides the executive, you have the independent judiciary, and then you have, of course, the Congress. So in the last 8 months, what we have seen are some very dramatic actions by the other two branches of government to check the power of the executive. So you had very early on, you had a federal judge out in an island in the Pacific Ocean. Of course, it was a state, one of the 50 states, Hawaii. But this one judge was able to stop dead in its tracks the power of the executive, an executive order, which he believed was not instituted with enough input from the American body politic. And then with Congress, of course, Congress not only does Congress pass laws, it has the power to hold hearings and hold investigations. And of course, you have the ruling party, which has set up several investigations, chaired by senators and congressmen from the ruling party to investigate some allegations into interference of a foreign power and possible collusion of a presidential campaign in these interferences. So, turning to Georgia, as I look at the situation, clearly the elections last year showed that the system needed to be fixed. You had a situation where you had the party that won the election with 48.8% of the vote, got 115 seats, and the leading opposition party got 27% of the vote and only 27 seats. This is clearly, this is a system that needs to be fixed. And that's part of what's going on right now. But I would say that there's an even more fundamental issue, and here I need to be careful. And that fundamental issue is no one doubts the political will of Georgia to become a fully developed democratic state on a bipartisan basis. But I think what we have is, how do I say this? A deficit of appreciation for the need for three separate and equal branches of government. I think that what we see right now, we've talked about the independent judiciary. I don't think what we have here is a kind of system that we see in Russia and other states where politicians can call up a judge and order up a decision. But I do think you have a situation where the judges don't feel entirely empowered and do look over their shoulder before they make a decision and need to feel much more independent and feel their role as providing a check against the power of the executive. And then I think for Parliament, again, I think it's not just a matter of passing laws, it's a matter of holding the executive accountable. It's a matter of holding hearings, holding investigations. And until there is this rebalancing, where I think right now you have a hypertrophic executive and two other branches of power that haven't really appreciated their role and really been empowered to do at least what we believe should be done in the American experience, and that's ensure that there is not overreach of executive power, that the rights of the people are respected, that there's transparency, and that there's checks against that power.
Thank you. We have 9 minutes, and I would like to give the current speaker a chance to come back on some of the points that have been raised, because I think as the speaker and as the representative of the ruling party, the burden falls particularly heavily on you to sustain this process. But I can take 2 or 3 comments, questions from the floor, observations before we end this session. And I might just take them collectively and ask you to be very, very brief. Thank you. And I'm very short-sighted, so please identify yourselves. Do we have a microphone that we can pass around? Yes. Thank you, David. I do know this is
duty of the speaker to hand the microphone.
Thank you. Please identify yourself for everybody else.
I will do, yeah. I'm Ian Bond from the Centre for European Reform in London. I'm very fond of a saying of Deng Xiaoping that it doesn't matter whether the cat is black or white as long as it catches mice. And I'd say that the existing constitution has caught quite a lot of mice over the last few years, with the association agreement, visa liberalization, with Georgia's move up the tables of ease of doing business, lack of corruption and so on, as outlined by the President and the Prime Minister earlier. Even after this very long and erudite discussion, I have to say I don't understand what it is that the new constitution will enable you to do better than the existing constitution. Will it catch more mice? So I look forward to hearing the answer.
Will it catch more mice? Thank you. Another comment here. Thank you. Could we pass the microphone, please? Thank you.
Thank you. Just one sentence, Georg Andalaki from Parliamentary Minority, on the need of checks and balances. It's just a fact that since his election as Prime Minister, the current Prime Minister, who spoke earlier today, has been to Parliament for questioning exactly 0 times. Scrutiny of the executive is a fundamental thing, why Parliament exists in the first place. So I think this gives an idea of the context in which Georgia operates today, which makes our country weaker rather than stronger. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, lady there. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I would just like to ask a very brief question to...
Could you identify yourself?
Tina Boguchava, United National Movement, Member of Parliament. And I'd like to ask a quick question to the current Speaker of Parliament about his definition of consensus, because unfortunately, including at this forum, we heard from him that he believes there is consensus around the constitutional document. And he spoke with quite a bit of pride about the constitutional process, which adopted one document, which was also sent to the Venice Commission, and yet the Parliament then adopted through 2 hearings an entirely different document, not taking into consideration a fundamental component, which was the transfer of Georgia to a fully proportionate electoral system in 2020. So I'm just wondering if consensus in the Georgian dream is defined by agreement among the various individuals within the Georgian dream, or if he can identify any other political group that has expressed its satisfaction with the current draft of the Constitution. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to invite Irakli to try and draw together, having heard the various different contributions. I believe you did say, though you didn't say it in a yes or no fashion, that were the opposition to be able to state clearly what their position was on amendments they would like to see, you would be willing to pursue further discussion on that. So we now do have from the opposition one part of the opposition, a very clear statement that the 2020 date is very important and the direct elections is very important. We've had some historical perspective from David here, noting that a year ago Georgian Dream was open to that 2020 date. And we've had the reminder from Ambassador Kelly about the separation of powers. And I go back to what the Venice Commission said. They also had some doubts about the proposal to remove the direct election of the president, because in the historical context of Georgia, where the parliamentary system and political system was not fully developed, that was the most important other independent institution in the country. And so if you get rid of the direct election of the president, it was even more incumbent to make sure that the electoral system for parliament withstood that sort of transcending generations test. So I come back to you and ask, is there space to give this more time? David talked about a historic opportunity last year being missed. You don't have to miss that historic opportunity. And I will quote, if I may, from the founder of the Georgian Dream in September 2012. actually in October 2011, when he declared he was forming Georgian Dream, who said that President Saakashvili has a total monopoly on power, and the constitutional amendments clearly reveal his intention to maintain power and stay in leadership beyond any constitutional term. And in September 2012, he said in an interview, "I was forced to come into politics because Saakashvili was destroying the opposition." And afterwards, Ivanishvili says, once he has returned to civil society, "I will become an active member of society to help society learn how to elect people and how to control their politicians and make sure there is a free press and a real opposition." So you have that opportunity to fulfill that aspiration that brought Georgian Dream into being in the first place. Can I leave it to you to have the last word?
Thank you for this question. And I would like also to thank the distinguished guest about his question about the content of the document. So look, we are talking about the document, about the constitutional amendments for 1 hour and a half already, and the gentleman has no understanding about the content of the document at all. And that describes the situation in general. We have spent 99% of our time about talking about the process. And there was no discussion about the content of the document. That describes the situation in the Georgian society around the constitutional amendments in general. We have to talk about the process, which is the secondary issue compared to the content of the document. The main thing is the content of the constitutional amendments. As for the better things in the new constitution, the main goal of any constitution is to ensure the principle of the checks and balances. That's the main purpose of any constitution. According to the conclusion of Venice Commission, which was sent to the Parliament of Georgia back in 2010, the Venice Commission has said that the present constitution, the current constitution in force, is not taking into consideration the principle of checks and balances. That's the main shortcoming and main disadvantage of the current constitution. We have to fix it. That was the historic task of the present Parliament, and we had an excellent opportunity because of the constitutional majority that the Georgian Dream Party now has. We had the historic chance to fix the constitution and to bring it in line with the principle of checks and balances. There are numerous issues which are improved in the new text of the constitution, starting from the first provisions, the basic provisions which are about the principles of democracy, rule of law, social state. Then we have significant improvements in the chapter on the human rights. In the chapter on the parliament, we are essentially significantly strengthening the main institution in the parliamentary system, which is the Parliament of Georgia. There was a question from the opposition MP about the role of the parliament in this system. We fully agree that the parliament is quite weak at this moment, and the parliament should be strengthened. And this document is also designed to strengthen the main institution in the parliamentary democracy, which is the Parliament of Georgia. We have significant improvements about the government of Georgia, about the accountability and responsibility of the government to the parliament, which was one of the main weaknesses of the present constitution according to the Venice Commission's conclusion. Currently, the government of Georgia is too strong according to the text of the constitution, and the parliament, it's nearly impossible for the parliament to dismiss the government, which of course affects negatively the principle of checks and balances, and we are fixing it. We are fixing the chapter on the defense issues. We have very ambiguous statements about defense, and we are bringing these statements in line with the experts' opinions. There are numerous changes about the locals of government at all. There are numerous changes envisaged by the new constitutional amendments, which are significantly improving the situation with regard to checks and balances. Again, one of the most important dramatic changes is related to the parliamentary election system. It happens for the first time that we are moving from the mixed system to the proportional system. I would welcome moving to this system already again for 2020. But one thing is what is my opinion, another thing is what is achievable in the current complex situation. It's politics, and we have to achieve the consensus. We had to achieve the consensus with 116 MPs in the parliamentary majority. The constitutional majority is 113 votes, and it means that even if 4 members of the parliament vote against, you will fail to achieve the proper number of votes for the constitutional amendments. We had to achieve the consensus with the government. Again, we are weakening the government, and we had to achieve the consensus with the government about the constitutional amendments. We had to go through a very complex process, and finally, the outcome of the process is that we are delivering a very high quality document, which is not just a paper, which is not just a piece of paper. This piece of paper will work very effectively, because we have a very concrete provisions envisaged by the constitutional amendments, which will strengthen the rights of the opposition, which will strengthen the main constitutional bodies, which will strengthen the democratic system in general, and which will strengthen the system of checks and balances, which is the most important task of any constitution. Again, and one more important thing to be said about the process is that we had the State Constitutional Commission created, and this commission delivered a draft according to which we had to move to the proportional system already in 2020. And I just wanted to correct Mr. Usupashvili about our statement related to the proportional system. We said that it was the political will of the leadership of the Georgian Dream Party to move to the proportional system in 2020, but we needed the support from the parliamentary opposition to achieve this change. Because again, it was just impossible to achieve the consensus with 113 MPs, only the parliamentary majority. That's why we needed the support from the parliamentary minority. But again, we had a meeting with them, with the parliamentary opposition, and they refused to support the constitutional amendments in any matter. The more problems are created by the opposition, the more problematic is for me to negotiate with the parliamentary majority and with the governmental team. I'm the person who has to negotiate. The more problems are created, the more problematic it is. So that's why the final process was related to this question and answer, and we asked the opposition in a very simple manner to provide the list of issues under reflection of which they would support the constitutional amendments. They provided improper answer on that. We checked it again, and again they provided an improper answer. We don't have a documented list of issues under reflection of which they are ready to support the constitutional amendments. That's the current state of affairs. Finally, despite the difficulties, despite the lack of consensus around the constitutional system, we have managed to achieve the historic mission this parliament had. And we are delivering the constitution which is in full compliance with the best practices of the European parliamentary democracies. And this document will be enacted in a full-fledged manner in November 2020. That is the final outcome of the reform process. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, it was too much to hope we would resolve it in an hour and a half, but I think it has helped clarify how we got here, and I wish you well, and I hope the discussions will continue. Thank you. I know we've run a little bit over our time. Kurt, do you want to? Thank you to all our panelists.
We don't have a final word, okay.
And thank you also to Ambassador Hall for resuming her duties in Georgia. So we appreciate that. As I promised, there will be a coffee break. We now take about a half an hour.